Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I have some exciting news that I want to share. It's not anything to do with me or this channel. As we introduce today's video, our friends over at the American Battlefield Trust, who, if you have been around this channel at all, you know that I absolutely love, and every year for my birthday, I intend to do a fundraiser for the American Battlefield Trust. Their sole mission is to preserve historic sites, particularly battlefields, here in the United States, and to educate about the historic events associated with them. They have literally spent millions and millions of dollars preserving and protecting and restoring battlefields all across the country. Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Civil War in particular. And of course, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be with our friend of the channel, Gary Edelman, who I got to meet last fall in Gettysburg. And me and him and JD from History Underground are going to do some stuff together. But the reason that I bring that up is because something happened with their channel, and it's fantastic to see. 13 days ago, Gary made a video thanking everyone for them hitting 200,000 subscribers. 13 days ago, they're at 253,000 today, 2 weeks later. Somewhere around the middle of July, about 12 days ago, they went from 130, 140, 150,000 views a day to where on the 23rd, just a couple of days ago, they had 1.73 million views in one day. And they're averaging right around 1.5 million views a day for the last week or so. So awesome to see that. New subscribers, they went from getting 500 to 1,000, well, about 500 a day on average, to gaining 6,000 subscribers a day. So excited to see that. They're getting more in 12 hours than I've gotten in this last month. So that's amazing. I'm so happy for them. It could not happen to a better organization. So glad to see that happen. So with that in mind, we're going to visit one of their videos today. I watched it the other day. In full disclosure, I've told you before, anytime I'm reacting to a video I have seen before, I will tell you that. That is the case with this one. I did watch it the other day. I don't remember much about it, some things here or there, but I thought it would be interesting to watch them talk about their favorite Civil War movies and why, and then I'd give my own feedback as to what I thought of that movie if I indeed saw it. There's a few they mentioned I've never seen that I might need to check out. And it gives us a jumping off point for discussion about these movies, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below about movies that they mentioned that you've seen and what you think of them compared to my thoughts, compared to their thoughts. And then if there's anything that we didn't mention, let me know. As always, the link is in the description below. Please subscribe to the American Battlefield Trust. Absolutely worth it. A first-class organization with first-class people. I don't know most of the people at ABT, but I've been a supporter of theirs. I'm a member of the American Battlefield Trust. Gary and Chris are people that I consider to be friends now, as I got to know them, spending time with them in Gettysburg. Let's dive in.
People often think historians just sit around and talk about, tactics and weapons and the home front and whatnot. But today we're going to talk about movies, okay? Do you have some favorite Civil War movies?
I do have some favorite Civil War movies. My favorite Civil War movie is Glory.
Me too.
I like...
You guys have heard me mention that too. I don't think there is another movie, Civil War era movie, that comes anywhere close to the quality of Glory. And we were doing the interview the other night with Sarah, the history chick, JD and I. And JD made a good point that Glory's, 25 years old now? And it still holds up really well. It really does. Nothing else comes close to the storytelling, the fantastic script, the way it's shot, the acting is first class, the casting was really well done. It just is all the right things put together.
Pharaoh's Army very much, a little movie about the backwater of the war in Kentucky. And I even like Ride with the Devil.
I love Ride with the Devil.
I like it. I was going to refuse to see it because Jewel was in it. And I couldn't imagine Jewel being a good actress.
See, I
She's
think
actually very good
she
in
is,
it.
and I think I saw it because Jewel was in it.
Well, so you're shallower than I am, but I think that it's a very good movie. Once you get past the quite large hurdle of accepting the African-American Confederate guerrilla, then just relax and enjoy the film. Who would have thought Ang Lee would end up directing a good Civil
So, and it's kind of funny he mentions that because those of us who love history and who study history, and in particular when you see a movie about a historical event or time period that you really know a lot about, and I've said this before, I consider myself an expert on the American Civil War. If there's any area of history I have expertise in, it's that one. And men like this, I don't know Gary, but I know this Gary. Gary Edelman makes me look like an absolute first day noob amateur when it comes to his knowledge of the Civil War. So I can only imagine what that's like for someone like that to watch a movie set in a time period you know everything about. Sometimes things like that can turn you off to a movie if they get something really, really wrong, but other times you can kind of overlook that if it's an enjoyable story.
War movie. I mean, that's
Yes.
he wouldn't be my first choice.
Well, then you led into something right there. You talked about whether somebody gets it right or not. And this is the age-old question. What's better, to make a great movie with mistakes that might inspire people, or to make a perfect movie that may or may not? Do you have come down?
Well, I think the perfect movie would be one that does both, and no movie does both. I think that Glory comes close. It gets most of the big things right. It gets some little things wrong. They attacked the wrong way, and the real Civil War aficionados got upset about that. I think that in terms of impact on an audience, the most important thing is that it be well acted and well crafted. And
Yeah, I agree. For a perfect example, and this isn't a Civil War movie, but Braveheart. Braveheart historically is a mess, but it was a very good movie, very good entertainment. And Braveheart, the movie, led me to an interest in that time period and led me to study the real history. If it had been a bad movie but was historically accurate, I'm not sure it would have done that. So I kind of agree. I'd rather a really good movie that maybe gets a few things wrong than a really bad movie that maybe gets it right.
And have dramatic momentum. And so making sure that you get every nitpicking, if you have the number of rivets on the
thread counters.
No, the thread counters. And I think there's a dimension of that to some parts of Gettysburg. I don't think Gettysburg ever comes to life the way that the very best Civil War movies do. I like Gettysburg, but
Yeah, and I think my issue with Gettysburg is the same issue that a lot of people have, which is that number one, it was great that they used Civil War reenactors, and to a person, all the actors at Gettysburg said they could not have made that movie without the reenactors. The problem is a lot of reenactors are my age and in my shape. And that just doesn't reflect the reality of a Civil War army. These guys were marching thousands of miles over the course of a few years. They were living on very meager rations, especially the Confederate Army. They would not have been an army made up of 50-year-old, 250-pound guys. It just wouldn't have been that way. Would there have been people like that here and there? Perhaps. But so that's part of the reality with that. And, of course, the other thing is it's rather sanitized. Yeah, you see explosions. Yeah, you see people go down, but it's not bloody. It's not graphic. And I don't think you need to be overly graphic. You don't need to be gratuitous with it. Not every movie needs to be Saving Private Ryan with the Omaha Beach scene. But, Glory does that. You see some scenes in Glory. You got the scene where Shaw is at Antietam attacking with the 2nd Massachusetts, and the young officer in front of him, a cannonball, just basically blows his face off. But it wasn't real graphic, but it was enough to give you that gut punch of the horror of war. And Gettysburg just doesn't have that. It's got, things like the guy playing General Hood. Hood was like in his late 20s, like right around 30 years old at Gettysburg, and the guy playing him is like in his 50s, stuff like that.
I don't think it's among the very best.
Yeah, and I'll say this as a Gettysburg guide especially, because if you're a Gettysburg guide, you have to deal with the movie Gettysburg all the time. But I'm still glad the Buford people come. That's it. I can always undo the historical mess. They might get mad at me, and they often do. And, oh my God, Joshua Chamberlain's not the only colonel at Gettysburg. I try to put it in perspective.
I thought he was the only colonel in the Union Army.
He led the Union Army as a colonel.
I like Joshua Chamberlain. He was an academic who functioned in the real world. Think about
there you
that.
Go.
I mean,
the rarest of all things.
Who knew? The rarest of all things. It's just odd they didn't put a statue up to him as they did to others who were on Little Round Top.
Yes, and who tried
maybe
to get
Strong, Vincent, and anyway.
So undoing historical mess is good. I would always rather do this, but I also want to...
Yeah, and he makes another good point there, is that if people bring up the movie to someone like Gary and say, oh man, so how was, the portrayal of John Buford by Sam Elliott in Gettysburg? And he can say, well, here's what I liked about it, but here's the real history behind that. Let me tell you some history, stuff like that.
Bring up, there's all these movies that sit on the fringe. I don't know if they're Civil War movies or not. I'll think of Cold Mountain and Dances with Wolves, both movies I love.
I wrote a book about the Civil War in film and art, and I included both of those films. I think Cold Mountain purports to be a Civil War film. I don't think it really is a Civil War film. And in terms,
it's a movie set during the Civil War, much like a movie like Gone with the Wind or Lincoln. It's not primarily focused on the war, but it's set during the war and shows what's happening during the war. I think the Cold Mountain, the scene with the crater at the beginning of Cold Mountain at Petersburg is fantastic. Likewise, they've got that little glimpse of a scene at Jenkins Ferry in Lincoln. That's the Civil War movie I want to see. JD and I were talking about that in our interview the other day. They give us those little tastes, but they don't give us the whole thing.
In terms of getting things wrong, it gets a lot of things wrong.
Yes.
Dances with Wolves is set during the Civil War, and you can make points about how it does or does not align with how I think most of the Civil War generation would have thought about the war, especially on the Union side. I even think that The Last Samurai is sort of a Civil War movie. I really do. And I think of it as Dances with Wolves goes east.
Well, let me then move on to another one here real quick, and that is, we're getting a cue for it too, Lincoln. I'm a fan of Team of Rivals, and I'm a fan of the movie.
So Team of Rivals is the book that was written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, presidential historian, and it was a part of Team of Rivals, which is this huge book. My wife got it for me several years ago. It's fantastic. Really, really good. If you want to really get to know Lincoln, the man and the politician, Team of Rivals is a great book, but prepare. It's a chore to get through. I don't mean that as a negative. I mean it's a long commitment, I guess is what I'm saying. And the part set in early 1865 in Team of Rivals is the part that was used to inspire the movie Lincoln.
Yeah, I think any actor who plays Abraham Lincoln again,
Daniel Day-Lewis was phenomenal.
I think that Daniel Day-Lewis absolutely nailed Lincoln. Having said that, I almost left the theater
in the second scene
when they start quoting the Gettysburg Address to Abraham. Lincoln couldn't have quoted the Gettysburg Address in 18. It was painfully uncomfortable.
I had the exact same experience.
Painfully uncomfortable. And then when they finish, the two white soldiers start to quote it, and then the African American soldier finishes it.
Yeah, and I get it. That part is I understand what they're trying to do there. Yeah, that scene would not have happened. But they're trying, I think, to communicate something. Sometimes in a movie, they will give you a fictional scene that would never have happened in real life to try and get you to understand a larger theme or to try to get you to understand a feeling. And in this case, I think what they're trying to say here is that by early 1865, as it's evident the war is about to be won, and Lincoln has just won his second term in office, he starts to take on a larger-than-life status. He starts to take on a mythical-like status among the people of the North. And I think they're trying to portray that here, to show how ordinary soldiers saw Lincoln at this point. So it didn't bother me as much as it bothered those guys, but I understand where they're coming from.
I thought really,
and by the way, schools Abraham Lincoln as well.
He's lecturing to Abraham Lincoln, as of course many common soldiers did. Yes, he is to be lectured to. He was tall, but didn't understand a lot. But some of my favorite things in films are how preposterous they were. I loved the film Shenandoah
Never saw that.
as a boy. I was
There we
only
go.
14 when it came out. It didn't occur to me then that it was kind of odd to have infantrymen in trees where they could get to fire one shot, wouldn't be able to reload, but the opponent would know, hey, they're in the trees. Maybe we can shoot them out of the trees.
It made pretty well.
Really a nutty movie. A nutty movie.
Let's talk about Gods and Generals,
Oh,
which
boy.
I just, terrible screenplay.
Terrible.
I
It's
can't
too
get
long.
around it.
It's too long.
It's too
It's too
long. And
long.
do we really need Stonewall Jackson crying in a parlor for 45 minutes? Well, in the meantime, you're skipping other major war events.
Excellent point. Let me give my positives about Gods and Generals, first of all. It's the first decent portrayal we've ever had of parts of the Battle of Fredericksburg. Largest battle ever fought in North America. Fredericksburg. Not Gettysburg, not any of those other battles. It was Fredericksburg. Now, it wasn't the bloodiest, and not all of those forces were engaged. So maybe in terms of number of troops that actually fired their weapons, Gettysburg's bigger. But almost 200,000 men on the field at Fredericksburg. Just a lot of the Union guys didn't actually fight. So I like the Marie's Heights scenes. I like some things they did there. And again, they play fast and loose with the truth, having the Georgians, or having the Irish guys fighting against each other, which didn't really happen. There was no Irish regiment on the Confederate side, the way they show it anyway. They're right about the screenplay. The screenplay is atrocious. The dialogue just makes me sick to even watch and shake my head. I would love an edit of Gods and Generals that takes everything out but the battle scenes and then gives us more, because they filmed parts of Antietam and you can find them online. But again, they barely show anything about Antietam, the bloodiest battle, the bloodiest day in American history, one of the most important battles in American history, certainly one of the most important battles of the Civil War, and they don't even show it in the theatrical version of Gods and Generals. They don't show Second Manassas. They don't show anything with the 7 Days campaign, how Lee came to command the army. They skip over so much to give us that god-awful dialogue with the families in Fredericksburg.
My favorite scene is the one between Stonewall Jackson and his prospective cook, where they decide that both Jackson,
I think he's being sarcastic,
the general, and the African-American who's from Lexington, they're going to both have a great future in the Confederacy. I mean, that, when a book titled Stonewall Jackson, the Black Man's Friend came out shortly after that, I attributed it directly to those scenes. Yeah.
I actually, though, what I like about movies, too, is when you get that little glimpse into time. Now, I never thought that soldiers were actually exchanging one cigar for half a cup of coffee, but I thought that was a really effective scene in Gods and Generals. I really enjoyed it, because you could imagine two guys just interacting in a river that way.
Yeah, they showed that scene in Gods and Generals. I think it takes place in between Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, when the two armies are largely kind of just sitting tight for the winter. And there's those places on the Rappahannock River where you can kind of walk across between the armies. And he does make a good point, though, that that's not typically a one-on-one kind of thing. It would have been more like a bunch of guys in this regiment gathered up a bunch of stuff to trade with a bunch of guys from the other regiment. And they might have sent a couple of guys out there to make the swap.
Free State of Jones. My thought as I went through the Free State of Jones, which seemed interminable to me, was how many years can Matthew McConaughey go without washing his hair? That was my main thought in that movie. I thought it was...
I'm not nearly as critical as Free State of Jones. Yeah, I wasn't thrilled with the Civil War scene, and honestly, I don't think that was meant to be the focus of the movie. It's just kind of setting up who McConaughey is and his disillusionment with the Confederacy. But I think there are some great merits to the Free State of Jones, in particular how it portrays Reconstruction, which is a glimpse of a time period, an awful time period in American history we just don't get very often in film. And it's got a couple of scenes in Free State of Jones later on that are just, they're brutal. And I don't mean they're bad scenes. I mean they're brutal in terms of how they impact you, because they show you the brutality of Reconstruction and what was happening to freedmen in the South. for that reason alone, I think it's must see. I think people need to get that gut punch over what was happening and understand Reconstruction a little better through a movie like this.
It was so awful as a film. I had to find something to focus on. That's what I focused on. He never washed his hair and still got all the women. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, it's probably like real life, actually. I actually liked the first half hour of that movie, and then I was waiting for it to go somewhere.
It doesn't go anywhere.
No,
doesn't go
no,
anywhere.
It didn't.
And every bit of dialogue that he has, that the main character has, seems as if it's headed right for a stone wall somewhere to be engraved for all of us to just read it later and learn from it. I mean, it doesn't seem like real dialogue. It's so didactic. It's so stilted. And it went on and on. It went on and on.
And here's the problem with newer Civil War movies, and JD and I talked about this too, and he made a good point. It's really, really hard to make a genuine and realistic Civil War movie today because of the sensitivities involved and the topics involved. We are in the place as a culture where I think it's really hard to make a Civil War movie right now. I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Well, now you write about the Civil War in film, so let me try to hit you with one you may not have seen because it's not obviously a Civil War thing, but Sahara.
Also,
Of
I
course
like that
I've seen
movie.
Sahara
Okay.
and finding the ironclad in the desert, and the cannons still work. That's the amazing thing. I actually like Sahara more than the Free State of Jones.
So Sahara, it's obviously a completely fictional story, and it does involve elements of the Civil War because they find this ironclad in the desert. But it was really, I thought, a very entertaining movie. I thought it was good. That's one I'd watch again.
If I were locked in a room and had to watch one 5 times, I'd watch Sahara 5 times.
All right, good. And the co-star of it, Steve Zahn's a good friend of Battlefield Preservation.
That's
Really?
correct.
That's
So,
cool.
and I wasn't even going to make that connection, and that's not why I would prefer to watch it. I actually think it's a better movie. We haven't talked
I like
yet about
McConaughey,
the
one of my
most
favorite actors.
famous and influential Civil War film of all time, not even close, and that's Gone with the Wind. For me, the first time
Which
I
I've never
saw
seen.
it didn't seem like a Civil War movie at all. It just seemed like a kind of sappy, romantic movie to me as a 14-year-old. I kept thinking, where's the war? I was disappointed as a young boy.
How about now?
Now, I think it's a wonderful way to get at major themes relating to the era, including how the Lost Cause interpretation of the war was translated cinematically. It's a well-made film in many ways, and so it's effective. That long tracking scene at the railroad station where the camera pulls back and back and back, and eventually you see more than 1,500 real human beings and a couple of thousand dummies as casualties with the Confederate flag flapping just to the left.
It's a beautiful shot.
It connects the overwhelming loss on the Confederate side. It's an immensely effective Lost Cause scene.
And you've also
So I have never seen Gone with the Wind, starring Clark Gable, a Northeast Ohio guy who's from Cadiz, Ohio, which is like an hour away from me. Never seen it. I don't know why I've never seen it. It came out in 1939. I think that was the same year that The Wizard of Oz came out. Hugely popular. Still to this day, when adjusted for inflation, one of the highest grossing movies of all time. It was written by Margaret Mitchell, who's a Southerner, I think, and obviously has those Lost Cause themes to it, things like that. I think I'm going to have to probably sit down and watch that one.
also got the glory Dances with Wolves amputation sort of stuff.
Well, every
going on
film
there.
has the amputation. I mean,
Yes, you need that.
that's obligatory now.
And that's a
Yeah.
major myth we need to deal with
Yes.
is presence of anesthesia in most Civil War
that's right.
operations.
Excellent point, and that's something he probably should address in a video if he hasn't already, is that they did have anesthesia during the Civil War. Guys were not all over the place by the thousands having amputations done without any kind of anesthesia. They used things like ether and chloroform. They had that stuff available. Now, in big battles, it would sometimes run out because of the number of casualties that were involved, but those big battles where that would happen do not account for the vast majority of casualties in the Civil War.
For me, Gone with the Wind, really, I mean, despite the lost causiness of it, if I may, it still stands very well with me. It's a great window into the South, into the 20th century South and their perceptions back then. Like
Oh
you said.
no, it's a wonderful teaching tool. Absolutely a wonderful teaching tool.
Agreed. And Rhett Butler and Vivian Leigh, just great performances, I think.
Yes.
I'm a big fan. So let's move on then. Let's talk about another older film, The Horse Soldiers.
The
Never
Horse
seen that.
Soldiers was a film that I loved as a young person again because there weren't that many Civil War films, and here was one. Even I knew that it was based very loosely on Grierson's Raid. major stars, William Holden and the Duke, and directed by John Ford. Almost anything John Ford does is certainly worth watching, and I think The Horse Soldiers is entertaining, and it gets a ton of things wrong.
Yeah.
And the Newmarket-like scene with the little boys attacking, where the federal defenders don't shoot them, they spank one of them. And well, in the real Civil War, you shoot them.
And we all know that the Newmarket cadets must have moved 800 miles first to have their
That's
engagement
correct.
against
It's a
Pearson's
long
men.
way to Mississippi.
Yes, indeed, it is.
That's right. Red Badge of Courage is one of my favorite Civil War films. It's in my top 5.
I liked the Red Badge of Courage as a kid, too.
Yeah, stars Audie Murphy, a real-life war hero. I saw that, but it was a long, long time ago. I was a kid when I watched that, and honestly, I don't remember that much about it.
In fact, I saw it before Glory. It's one of the few Civil War movies I ever saw, unless you count North and South.
A
I'm talking about
miniseries.
North and South.
Yes, it's
All
true.
remain.
Elkanah Bent. He was like before the Emperor was in, Return of the Jedi. There was Elkanah Bent.
No, and of course the evil prisoner of war commandant.
Oh my God, yeah.
Played
Wayne
by
Newton.
Wayne Newton.
I love North and South. I was obsessed with North and South when I was younger, when it first came out. They have North and South Book 1, which covers it kind of picks up the story of this northern family, the Hazards, and the southern family, the Maines, from South Carolina. Hazards are from Pennsylvania. South Carolina, Maines, they own a plantation with slaves and cotton and all that sort of stuff. In the north, you have the Hazards, who have an iron foundry, and these two young men, George Hazard and Ori Maine, go to West Point, and they meet and become friends, and then the story follows them from West Point to Mexico, to the post-war, post-Mexican War, to where the country's starting to tear itself apart, and how that impacts two particular families. And it goes right up to the eve of the American Civil War. And then North and South Book 2, which came out, I think, a year or two later, covers the Civil War years. Again, fantastic. Fictional characters who are woven into real-life stories and situations. And I thought really, really well done. If you like something like Saving Private Ryan, which is a fictional story that's woven into real-life stuff, I think you would like North and South. Really, really good. Soundtrack's fantastic. You've got huge actors. Jimmy Stewart's in North and South Book 2. Let's see, who else? Oh gosh, why am I drawing a blank on her name? All right, so here's some of the cast. Kirstie Alley is phenomenal. She's this character that's kind of about as close to being insane as you can get without actually being insane. Philip Kasnoff is Elkanah Bent, like one of the all-time great bad guys in a miniseries right there. David Carradine's in it, Leslie Ann Down, Jeannie Francis, Wendy Kilborn is fantastic as Constance Hazard. Terry Garber is another kind of evil character who's fantastic in this. James Reed is George Hazard, one of the main characters. Who else is in this? It's really good. Of course, Patrick Swayze plays Ori Maine. Johnny Cash as John Brown. Hal Holbrook as Abraham Lincoln. Robert Guillaume as Frederick Douglass. I mean, just phenomenal casting in this all around. And that's just book 1. Let's talk about, that was 1985 that came out. Now let's talk, I want to look at book 2 because, again, you have the same kind of casting, a lot of the same cast, a few are different. But let's add to that now. We're going to have Jonathan Frakes as Stanley Hazard. Who else? Parker Stevenson plays his little brother, plays George's little brother, Billy Hazard. Lloyd Bridges as Jefferson Davis. Olivia de Havilland from Gone with the Wind plays Mrs. Neal. But there's a lot more to it than that. You have a lot of like one-off characters played by really big stars. Forrest Whitaker is in it, and I think that's kind of before he became famous. Robert Englund, who goes on to play Freddy Krueger, plays a deserter. Just looking to see who else there is. I know there's several more really, really big names in this. Let's see, you have Gene Simmons, Wayne Newton, as they mentioned. Of course, Hal Holbrook again, Morgan Fairchild's in it. Olivia de Havilland I mentioned already. just incredible named actors. David Ogden Stiers plays, I think, a senator in this. I know there's still one really big name that I'm missing here. Bryan Cranston was in North and South? All right, there's something I didn't know. Holy cow, that's like major, big time, like me learning something right as I'm making a video. That's crazy. Now, that's why I couldn't find her, because she was actually in North and South Book 1. But what I was trying to find was Elizabeth Taylor, who plays Madame Conti in North and South. So, yeah, Elizabeth Taylor, I mean, they don't get much bigger names than that.
I mean, that doesn't get better than that.
Right.
It really doesn't.
Yeah, I love North and South, and I was a Kirstie Alley fan too. Showing my shallowness yet again.
You really are.
So then let's move on to The Conspirator.
I thought The Conspirator
like
was tedious in the end. I understand why Redford decided to do it this way, but by putting the focus on Mary Surratt, it seemed like she was the only one really on trial, and the rest were just kind of background, when of course that isn't the way that it was.
And let me encourage you all, 4 times a year, Fort McNair in Washington, D.C. will actually open up and take people into the courtroom where Mary Surratt and the other male conspirators were tried. And, of course, ultimately her plus 3 others were hanged there. So 4 times a year you get to go on there, and it's very meaningful.
I liked The Conspirator. James McAvoy is one of the stars there. Of course, he's a Scotsman playing an American in multiple things. He played one in Band of Brothers. But a lot of big time stars in that one. You've got Kevin Kline playing Edwin Stanton. You've got who else is in that one? Of course, the cast list is just endless on that one too. I liked it. I thought it was really well done.
And they took the furniture from The Conspirator and some of the costumes and actually put them back there. So it's really cool stuff. And then in that same category of movies that aren't necessarily Civil War movies, Gangs of New York.
Absolutely. Gangs of New York is almost anything Scorsese does.
I wasn't a huge fan of that movie.
I find definitely worth watching. And that's true of Gangs of New York, although there's way too much violence in it. A friend who's a serious historian of violence in the 19th century United States said there are more people killed in the gangs in New York than were killed in New York City in more than 100 years. But there they are, including the number killed during the draft riots. That one scene where they're just lined up almost endlessly. We know there were about 105 to 110 people killed. Not in Martin Scorsese's New York. There are far more than that.
Let me just say that you're going to have a lot of casualties when ships are firing broadsides basically into
they're
a city.
They're shelling New York.
Yeah.
The United States Navy shells New York in the gangs.
Yeah, none of that happened. I don't know. I just couldn't get into Gangs of New York. And that's tough for me to say because anything that's set in that time period, I'm usually going to gravitate to, but I just couldn't get into it.
New York, yeah, that one I couldn't help but smile.
That's beautiful, but you needed a lot of smoke for DiCaprio, to find his enemy at the end.
A lot of smoke. That's right.
Well, then let's do it real quick because you've got Saving Lincoln, which I actually really enjoyed that movie about Ward Hill Lamont or Layman, and then you've got Abe Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Yep. This is a confession. I find Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter a very satisfying kind of guilty pleasure.
It was fun.
I love it because it takes the Gettysburg was the great turning point notion, which I think is misguided, to its ultimate end. Not only is it the great turning point, it's not only the most important battle of the war, it's the last battle of the war. After you win the Battle of Gettysburg, it's all over. The slaveholding vampires are gone. They've all been shot with silver bullets, and there you go.
Well, and you referred to it, actually, we don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but, finally I know why the Union was able to prevail at Gettysburg after watching that movie, and I found that especially satisfying.
And boy, did those trains prove effective in that.
Listen, as long as you don't take it too seriously, I actually thought Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter was a pretty fun movie to watch.
No,
they really did. It went right from D.C. to Gettysburg.
And Abe swung a mean axe. He really did. And in real life, Abraham Lincoln, right? He would challenge people to wrestling matches. He could hold an axe out like that. So it's kind of appropriate. And we like to think that maybe Lincoln was a badass. And he only weighed 180 pounds. He was. I actually think Lincoln was sort of a badass. I think that, Well, let me try to go through these. Our friend Jim Hessler came up with a rating system, and I'm just going to quiz you real quick as we close this out. Okay. From 1 to 5 cannonballs for each of the movies. Okay. So in no particular order. Dances with Wolves. 3. Sahara. 1.5. Glory. 5. Bam! Lincoln. 4. Gone with the Wind. 4.5. Red Badge of Courage. 4.5. The Conspirator. 2.5. The Horse Soldier. 3. Gettysburg. 3.5. Gods and Generals. 2.
Ride with the Devil.
4.
And that's our rating system. Thank you so much.
All
for
right, so of the ones that I've seen, I don't think I could really argue with any of his choices. But there you have it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What movies did you like? Did you not like? Which ones are must-sees as far as you're concerned? Let me know your thoughts. We'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.